The HOA built a fence on my land, blocked my access to my own lake, and then laughed when I called them out. So I did what they never expected. I took back everything, including the mansion they built on my property. About 12 years ago, I made what I thought would be a peaceful long-term investment. I bought a gorgeous 50-acre ranch in the countryside. Rolling hills, open pastures, dense tree lines, and a lake that stretched out like glass on calm mornings. It wasn't just beautiful, it was perfect. Quiet. Secluded. The kind of property you dream about when you want to escape the chaos of the city. No neighbors in sight. Just me, the land, and the sound of birds at sunrise. I spent years building my home out there, one room at a time. I fenced in a few pastures for animals, built a small dock on the lake for fishing, carved out trails for hiking and riding, and really made it mine. The lake was always my favorite part. It wasn't huge, maybe 7 acres, but it was private and unreal on a foggy morning. I'd get up, make coffee, and walk down to the shore like I was living in a postcard. I truly thought I'd found peace. But about 5 years ago, I got a letter in the mail from a real estate development company. I'll be honest, at first I didn't think much of it. These kinds of companies send "we want to buy your land" letters all the time. But this one was different. It wasn't trying to buy my land, at least not the whole parcel. It was a formal notice that a luxury housing development had purchased the land right next to mine. A large tract that used to be just raw woods and empty cow fields. They were planning to build a gated community. Big custom homes, walking trails, green spaces, tennis courts, the works. And sure enough, over the next few weeks the surveyors showed up, then the construction equipment, and not long after the trees started coming down on the other side of my fence. It was frustrating, absolutely, but I knew they had the right to develop their own property. Then one day, a few of their team members came out to the ranch. They brought paperwork and asked if we could talk. They were very polite and professional at first. They explained everything they were building and then proposed something unexpected. They wanted to include a section of the lake in their development's lifestyle amenities. Not the whole lake, of course. Just a small section. They suggested carving out a little area near the southern edge for community use. They wanted limited access for activities like fishing, kayaking, paddleboarding, non-motorized and during daylight hours only. They spoke about it like it was a win-win. They'd help maintain that section, provide liability coverage, make it beautifully landscaped, and keep it clean in exchange for letting their residents use it. Now, at first I was skeptical. I didn't love the idea of strangers accessing my lake, even if it was just one corner. But I also knew I couldn't stop the community from being built next door. And I thought, maybe if I work with them under specific, tightly controlled terms, I could keep things from getting out of hand later. So, we drafted a development agreement, had lawyers review it on both sides, and signed it. It explicitly stated that I retained full ownership of the lake and surrounding land. The only thing they were allowed was limited, conditional use of a small section by their residents during certain hours. No permanent structures, no fencing, no cameras or surveillance equipment, and no attempts to exert any form of control or ownership over the property. It was all in black and white. We even included review clauses that allowed either party to revoke the agreement under breach of terms. At the time, it felt like a solid middle ground. Fast forward to today, 5 years later. The community is fully built out now, hundreds of homes, each starting in the high 6 figures. And once construction was finished, the Homeowners Association, the infamous HOA, officially formed and took over the property management responsibilities from the developer. That's when things started to change. It was subtle at first. When I'd walk down to the lake, the HOA had added a little bench and a trash can on the far side. I didn't approve that, but I let it slide. Then I saw someone installing a solar-powered light post next to the water. Not a big deal, but again, not authorized. Then came the day everything changed. I was riding my ATV down my usual dirt path toward the lake when I suddenly slammed on the brakes. Right across the trail, a brand new black steel fence. 7 feet high. Sharp tips. And big, bold signs that read, "Private HOA property. No trespassing." I couldn't believe it. This fence was clearly on my land. They had installed it in the middle of the trail I'd been using for over a decade to get to the lake. And even worse, it divided my lake into their side and my side, as if they had any legal right to claim ownership. I turned back immediately and called the HOA board listed on the community website. I was firm but calm. asking who approved the fence and whether they realized it crossed into my property. What I heard next honestly shocked me. They told me the fence was within their rights and was installed for resident safety and privacy. They even claimed shared usage had somehow turned into shared ownership. That same week, they installed motion sensor security cameras on the trees around the fenced-in portion of the water. That tipped me over the edge. I showed up at their next HOA board meeting, agreement in hand. I walked in during their public comments portion and calmly laid out every breach of contract. Unauthorized fencing, signage that implied ownership, surveillance on private land, permanent structures. I told them they were not only in violation but were days away from being formally served with termination documents regarding our agreement. One guy literally laughed and asked, "What are you going to do? Sue the whole neighborhood?" He really shouldn't have said that. Because what none of them knew was that their fancy new HOA mansion, the big community clubhouse with the catering kitchen, gym and rooftop deck, was built on a parcel of MY land. Yup. When the original developer asked to use a particular 2.5-acre plot just past the lake's edge, I agreed, conditionally. That land was licensed, not sold. Meaning the HOA didn't own it. They were only allowed to use it as long as they followed the agreement to the letter. That fence? That camera? That smug attitude? All of it was grounds to revoke the license. So I met with my attorney the following Monday. We combed through every detail. By Thursday, we filed the official notice of contract termination with the county and sent legal notices to the HOA. They had 30 days to vacate the mansion and remove all unauthorized structures, or we would file suit, including claims for trespassing, damages, and full eviction. A real estate reporter caught wind of it, and soon enough, rumors were flying around the HOA Facebook groups like wildfire. Suddenly, the tone from the board changed. I started receiving friendlier calls. One member came by my property with cupcakes and a handwritten apology note. Another asked if I'd consider a renegotiation of the agreement. But at that point, I was done. No second chances. They spent years slowly pushing boundaries, assuming I wouldn't fight back. And they crossed a major line they didn't even realize existed. 30 days later, the mansion was locked up and cleared out. By legal order, it could no longer function as part of the HOA's amenities. Real estate agents had to update their listings. Community clubhouse no longer available. Residents were furious, and the board that started this mess? Gone at the next election. Today the lake is mine again. Every inch of it. The fence is gone. My trail is open. And where their mansion used to stand is now a freshly seeded meadow. I can finally drink my morning coffee in peace again. No cameras, no neighbors yelling across the lake, and no HOA board trying to steal the land I built my life on. So if you've ever dealt with an aggressive HOA, just remember. Never give up control, always read the fine print, and don't be afraid to fight back. Because fences don't make ownership, contracts do. Everything was peaceful until that morning. I just finished feeding the horses and had a bit of extra time before my morning calls. So I hopped on my ATV like I had countless times before, rode through the southern trail along the fence line, making my way down toward the lake, my favorite part of the land. The early sun reflected off the water, casting that orange-blue shimmer that made my lake look like something straight off a postcard. It was quiet, a bit misty, with only the sound of birds and the light growl of the engine beneath me. That moment of peace didn't last long. As I rounded the last bend through the wooded path, something flashed out of the corner of my eye. I slammed on the brake instinctively, and the ATV came to a skidding halt, kicking up gravel and dust. There it was, a brand new iron fence standing right in the middle of my property like some medieval barrier. 7 feet tall, jet black, bolted into the ground like it had always been there. Ugly as it was, that wasn't even the most shocking part. It had signs, big official-looking ones that read, "Private HOA access only, no trespassing. Security cameras monitoring." I blinked once, then twice. Surely this had to be a mistake. I got off the ATV, took off my gloves and walked closer. That fence wasn't just nearby the property line. It was at least 30 feet into my land, cutting off my access to the lake I'd owned and maintained for more than a decade. And to top it all off, I noticed 2 little black domes mounted high up on nearby pine trees. Security cameras, pointed at me. I was stunned. I stood there for what felt like several minutes, trying to wrap my head around what I was seeing. I mean, sure, we had a shared access agreement on paper, limited access. They were never supposed to build anything. Definitely not a barrier. Not a single post. That agreement was crystal clear. What gave them the right to fence me out of MY Lake? I didn't lash out. Not yet. My dad always taught me, don't go into battle until you're absolutely sure what you're shooting at. So I did what any reasonable landowner would do. I fired up my side-by-side, drove straight back to the house, pulled out that dusty old contract from my file cabinet, and began reading line by line. And sure enough, it was all there. A limited recreational access. Only during daylight hours. A no construction, permanent or temporary. A no surveillance equipment. A my continued full ownership of all land and water rights. Everything they weren't supposed to do they had now done, and in a major way. At this point, I still held on to hope that maybe this was all just a big miscommunication. Maybe some overzealous property manager misunderstood the boundaries. Maybe it had nothing to do with the HOA at all, and some contractor got the mapping all wrong. So I called the HOA office. I was professional, courteous. A lady answered and I explained the situation, told her about the fence, said it was illegally placed on private ranchland, and asked to speak to the property manager. She put me on hold. A man came on the line, introduced himself as the HOA board president, and let me say this. From the first 10 seconds I knew I was talking to someone who had no clue how property law worked, or worse, didn't care. I explained that I owned the lake and the surrounding land, and reminded him of the shared access agreement. I told him a fence like that wasn't authorized and requested its immediate removal. He chuckled. He said, "Oh no sir, that fence is perfectly legal. We're protecting our community's assets. We're doing what's necessary to protect our investment." He spoke like I was the trespasser on his land, like I should be thanking him for putting up a fence. The audacity of it left me speechless for a moment. I pressed further, pointing out that the agreement had terms, very specific ones, and that those cameras alone were a major violation. That's when he dropped the bombshell. Almost casually he said, "Well, our attorneys believe that your agreement is outdated. The board now manages the property along the water as part of community expansion. It's standard process." Wait. Excuse me? Outdated? Standard process? What did that even mean? These people were acting like they'd inherited the strip of land around the lake through some kind of real estate osmosis. As if shared access to the water somehow meant de facto ownership of everything around it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't a misunderstanding. They were knowingly trying to claim my land, and worse, they seemed smug about it. Like I didn't matter. Like I'd just roll over and accept it because they were some polished community with tennis courts and a fancy clubhouse. That's when I realized this was likely planned. Looking back, it all started to make sense. Those minor infractions, the bench, the trash bin, the landscaping around the water, little things I noticed here and there. I brushed them off then. Thought they were just small improvements for the shared space. But it wasn't just beautifying the area. It was a slow creep. An inch here, a sign there. A few residents starting to treat the southern part of the lake like their own private oasis. I once even saw them hosting a community yoga class right near the dock I had built, complete with mats, speakers, and someone pretending they had the right to kick me off for walking past. I went quiet for a few hours after that call. Not because I was defeated, but because I was preparing. I took out a highlighter, printed fresh copies of every agreement and plat map, and marked every single violation. The fence, the cameras, the false no trespassing signs. The hard evidence was piling up by the minute. I decided not to send an email, not to exchange words. No lawsuits, not yet. I wanted to confront them directly. So I made arrangements to attend the next HOA board meeting, which, like many of these communities, was held in their sparkly new clubhouse. A place that, ironically, I knew something about, but more on that in a bit. The meeting was packed when I walked in. People were talking about landscaping budgets, pool repairs, upcoming elections. It looked like any other community gathering. Until I got up and introduced myself during the open comments section. I calmly placed the stack of contracts, plats, and highlighted violations onto the table. And I asked them point blank, who authorized the fence? Who signed off on cameras pointing directly at my home? Who updated the access terms? Nearly every board member looked confused, or at least pretended to be. But that same board president, the one I'd spoken to, leaned back in his chair, tapped his fingers on the armrest, and said loud enough for the room to hear, "Well, frankly, that agreement you keep referencing might be outdated. Our community now has vested interest in maintaining the space. You may still own it on paper, but the residents use it every day. That counts for something." I couldn't help it, I laughed. "Use does not equal ownership," I said. "And a contract isn't a suggestion. It's a binding legal document. One that you've officially violated multiple times." He shrugged. "Well, you can talk to our lawyers if you want, but it's not going to change anything." And that's when I knew I was dealing with people who not only didn't care about the deal we made, but were setting themselves up for legal disaster. They weren't confused. They weren't misled. They were actively trying to take my lake. So I left that meeting, walked out of a room full of wide-eyed board members and residents who had no idea what storm was brewing. What they didn't realize was while they were busy putting up fences, I was already preparing to take back what they unlawfully claimed, and even more. Because that fancy clubhouse they were sitting in? Yeah, it was about to become my leverage. And the last place they'd expect to lose next. What they didn't seem to realize, what they truly had no clue about, was that their shiny, high-ceilinged granite countertop HOA mansion, that beautiful little event center they bragged about on every billboard, every social media post, every glossy real estate brochure, was also located on a parcel of my land. Yep, my land. Let's rewind a bit to make that crystal clear. Back when the developer first approached me about giving their future community lake access, they also pitched me on a separate idea. They wanted to build a small community events center, something tasteful, upscale, nothing too noisy, where residents could hold barbecue nights or Pilates classes or wedding receptions. They needed a triangular slice of land just beside the lake and slightly downhill from my main trail, land that was technically mine but awkwardly positioned, and not really being used for anything special at the time. I could see their logic. Why not use that part for something? It'll raise values, give us a clean shared line, build trust between neighbors. That's what they said. First I was hesitant, but they made assurances and I saw an opportunity to get ahead of things. So I agreed conditionally. That word matters. You see, I didn't sell the land. I didn't even sign a long-term lease. I gave them a conditional use license. That means I granted them permission to build their community space on that specific section, so long as the terms of the broader agreement were honored. And I made sure every inch of that remained recorded, notarized, and filed at the county. These weren't handshake deals. This was airtight. But here's the funny thing I've learned over the years. People stop respecting agreements the moment they think you don't have the power, or the will, to enforce them. Over time, new HOA board members came and went. Residents moved in who never even knew there was a lake agreement. The clubhouse opened with a ribbon cutting, champagne, live music, the whole performance. They gave it a name, the Lakeside Pavilion. Hell, they even had engraved bricks leading up to the door with donors' names on them. But while they were busy building their empire, they forgot the cardinal rule of land use. You play your game, and I'll play mine, but don't ever move your castle onto land you don't own. And when they blocked off my lake with a fence, when they installed cameras pointing at my home, when they told me with barefaced arrogance that the agreement is outdated, they violated not just my trust, but the legal tether holding their clubhouse together. That same week I sat down with my lawyer, a no-nonsense property attorney I've worked with for years. I brought every document, the lake agreement, the easement maps, the site development contract, and most importantly, the original conditional use license. He looked through everything slowly, carefully, then leaned back in his chair with a grin. "You want to pull the plug?" he asked calmly. I nodded. They crossed the line. In every possible way. "All right," he said. "Then let's burn it down, legally of course." We drafted a termination notice citing multiple breaches of the land use agreement and violations of property boundaries. It stated clearly that the HOA had 30 days to vacate and dismantle all structures built on my parcel, including the 3,200 square foot event center, or face legal action, including a formal eviction and demolition process through court order. That notice was hand-delivered to the HOA board within 48 hours, printed on gold-trimmed legal stationery, with the full authority of my attorney's firm behind it. What followed was pure chaos. I heard it first from one of the community's residents, a woman I'd met once during construction years earlier. She ran into me at the feed store 2 days after the letter was delivered. "What happened?" "I heard the clubhouse is getting shut down," she whispered, wide-eyed like she was spilling town gossip. I smiled, shrugged, and said, "Just taking back what's mine." "The HO board?" Well, panic doesn't even begin to describe their reaction. That Saturday morning, a car pulled up my drive. An expensive black SUV with tinted windows. A woman wearing a crisp polo with the HOA logo stepped out, carrying cookies and bottled water. Yes, actual cookies. She introduced herself as a newly appointed board member and said she wanted to start fresh and find a peaceful solution. She handed me a note, handwritten, mind you, that included an apology, a request to sit down and talk, and an offer to renegotiate the agreement. A few hours later, another rep called, stumbling through pleasantries before quickly shifting to legal questions. What would it take to reverse the termination? Would you consider a revised contract? Could we offer to purchase the land outright? By now it was almost funny. I had been disrespected for months, accused of missing boundaries, of causing problems. And now suddenly I was the most important person in their community. The better question was, where was this respect when they first started fencing me out? Because here's the thing they didn't seem to grasp. Once the contract was violated, it was my decision now. Not theirs. Not the board's. Not some community vote. Mine. They had set fire to the bridge, and now they wanted to patch it with duct tape and flower baskets. But I wasn't interested in apologies baked into double chocolate chip cookies. I gave them the same message I gave them at the board meeting. One I didn't say with anger or threats, just clarity. You violated the terms. That property reverts fully back to me. End of story. Within a week, the HOA sent out a memo to residents announcing that due to a land dispute, the lakeside pavilion would be temporarily closed while they sorted out ownership complexities. They said they were working closely with legal advisors. But internally it was chaos. I had contacts that kept me in the loop. Real estate agents were being told to stop advertising the clubhouse as part of the amenities. Event reservations were being canceled. Fundraisers had to be relocated. The HOA's budget was suddenly in free fall because the insurance firm refused to cover liabilities on that land after the license was revoked. And then came the pressure from residents, furious that birthdays, anniversaries, rehearsal dinners were being canceled or forced into tents. Some of them even accused the board of hiding the truth. Some HOA members demanded audits. Half the board resigned within a month. Meanwhile, my land sat quiet. I posted a clear boundary sign with legal wording just outside the now darkened pavilion. It read, "Private property. Trespassing strictly prohibited. Land under legal dispute." That sign alone got shared across at least 3 neighborhood Facebook pages. Screenshots, arguments, conspiracy theories. Some people even accused me of sabotaging the community. But others, they came to me one by one quietly. They'd mumble things like, "I don't blame you," or, "I had no idea they didn't own the land. That's on them." One man, a retired contractor, shook my hand at a gas station and said, "They stole from the wrong cowboy." I didn't say much. Honestly, I didn't need to, because they messed with something far more important than a lake or an event center. They messed with my boundaries both legally and personally. I spent years maintaining this land. I paid the taxes, pulled the permits, honored every handshake and written line. And I'm a simple man, respect me and I'll share the space. But try to take it, and I'll take everything back. Eventually, the HOA officially decommissioned the event center. No more parties, no more weddings, no more brochures featuring that damn deck overlooking my lake. The structure still stood for a while, empty and sad-looking, until they finally stopped maintaining it. Without power, cleaning, or repairs, it quickly deteriorated. 1 year later, they hired a demolition crew. And just like that, the lakeside pavilion, their beloved symbol of prestige, was gone. The land it sat on? Reseeded with native grasses. No signs, no banners, just peaceful stillness. The way it was before they ever came along. I walk the old trail sometimes, past the newly grown brush and soft earth, and watch the sunset over the lake just like I used to. Uninterrupted. Untouched. Unclaimed by anyone but me. Because here's a rule they learned far too late. You never build your kingdom on someone else's land. without first learning whose name is on the deed. And now they know. I made sure of that. Forever. The HOA tried to keep my land, but I took back everything they built on it. Within just 1 month, the so-called HOA mansion, their pride and joy clubhouse, the gem of their gated community, was shut down, locked up and scrubbed clean from their HOA's list of amenities. You wouldn't even know it existed today if you pulled up the community's official website. Listings that used to boast exclusive lakeside events center or private access to the pavilion now make vague references to local greenery and outdoor trails nearby. All gone. Sanitized. Erased from their fantasy land of brochures and buzzwords. And how did it happen? One word: accountability. You see, after I served the HO their legal notice to vacate the event hall they built on my land, they scrambled. I gave them 30 days to get out legally. They had no lease, no right to hold that space anymore after breaching our agreement. They knew it, their lawyers knew it, and worst of all, their residents started finding out too. At first, they tried to intimidate me legally, which was laughable considering they were the ones trying to hold stolen property. They filed suit, claiming that I had betrayed the original development plan. That by enforcing the termination clause, I was hurting the community and acting out of revenge. Their documents were filled with big words and dramatic language like irreparable harm, emotional damages, and loss of anticipated community value. But you know what courts care about? Boundaries, contracts, and facts. Not fairy tales. My attorney and I walked into the first hearing with a folder so thick it could level a chair. We brought the original development agreement, the conditional use license, the surveyed property lines, and a detailed list of every violation they committed, with photo and video evidence. They didn't stand a chance. Every judge that reviewed the case, and there were several as it moved through the county court system, came to the exact same conclusion. The defendant, that's me, is within full legal rights to terminate the agreement. The HOA violated multiple clauses and unilaterally overstepped property limitations. The property must be vacated and returned to the rightful owner. It was like watching a giant fall in slow motion. And by the time that gavel dropped, I had their so-called community center, legally classified as an unauthorized structure sitting on land they no longer had access to, and were liable for every day it remained in place. That hit them hard. Not just in pride but in their wallet. The insurance company pulled their coverage for the structure, citing breach of agreement with the landowner. Contractors refused to service it without a liability waiver. And the residents? Oh boy, they didn't take kindly to losing the very venue that had helped sell those million-dollar homes in the first place. The fallout was like a domino effect. The moment they legally acknowledged the structure was non-compliant, their list of what's commonly referred to as community assets had to be updated. The mansion was officially removed from all HOA documents as an amenity. No more renting it for parties, HOA meetings, or wine tasting nights. Their landscape team stopped mowing the grass around it. Windows were boarded up after a rock incident. Power was cut. Plumbing disconnected. And then came the nail in the coffin. The new HOA president, yes, new, issued an email to the residents stating that the board had voted to dismantle and remove the structure entirely. Why? Because they couldn't afford the legal liabilities, couldn't explain to new buyers why they had an empty building sitting on land they didn't own, and couldn't survive more lawsuits if someone got hurt using it illegally. It was surreal. Watching this $2 million building that once had chandeliers, slate fire pits, and lakefront yoga classes slowly get taken apart board by board, nailed shut, and eventually flattened. The land it sat on eventually became once again a grassy hill. Clean, natural, untouched. Exactly as it had been before they messed with me. To this day, that 7-foot iron fence they'd put up to cut me off from my own lake? It's long gone. Took them less than a week to tear it out after the final ruling. I remember walking back down that path, the one they tried to claim as their own, and seeing the last stretch of fencing being hauled off on the back of a trailer. And all I could think was, justice. My ATV trail to the lake is back in full use. I can now ride it every morning like I used to. No cameras watching me. No residents gawking from my dock. No whispers about that guy who takes his cattle too close to the walkway. Just peace. The HOA board as it stood back during the mess? Wiped out. Almost all of them stepped down or were voted out during the next election cycle, replaced by folks who, from what I hear, actually bother to read contracts and understand the law before making million-dollar decisions on other people's land. I still get updates even though I keep my distance. A former resident once told me they now refer to that patch of land where the mansion stood as the hill. Just the hill. No patio, no deck, no name tags or wine bar. Just a hill no one really talks about anymore because no one wants to admit what really happened. But I know what it represents. It's not just a legal victory. It's a warning. A monument to what happens when arrogance meets resistance. Think about it, millions of dollars went into planning that neighborhood. Architects, consultants, developers, board meetings, marketing teams, all of them painted this lake access lifestyle as the ultimate dream. A place where high-end homes met nature and high society. But none of it mattered in the end because they forgot one simple thing. Who owns the land? Because at the end of the day, you can throw up as many fences as you want. You can slap HOA property signs on everything. You can build mansions and hold fundraisers and bake sales. But if you build it on land you don't own, and violate the agreement with the person who does, you're not building a dream. You're building a disaster on borrowed ground. And sooner or later the person who owns it, he's gonna come knocking. So yeah, they learned the hard way. Their clubhouse is gone. Their fake ownership status is in the trash. The mansion is now grass. Their fences and cameras are dust. And I'm still here. Still riding that same trail. Still watching the sun rise over my lake with a cup of black coffee in hand and my dog at my feet. And if anyone ever comes knocking again wanting just a little use, just a sliver of land, just a small structure, you can bet I'll tell them the same thing I should have said from the beginning. No thanks. This land stays mine. Forever. Because if there's one thing this entire war taught me, it's that knowing your rights is power. And when someone tries to take what's yours, whether it's an HOA, a developer, or a board full of strangers in suits, you better have the backbone, the paperwork, and the grit to stand your ground. Because you may be one person, but as long as you hold the deed, you hold the line. And sometimes that's all it takes to win. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life land battles, legal showdowns, and stories that prove one person can make a difference.